Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
This is Gary Cinderbrandt, and welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Mark Ryski, the chairman of HeadCount.com, which as you begin to hear his story, you might be scratching your heads and thinking to yourself, why didn't I think of that? Because in retrospect, it seems incredibly obvious. And Mark, first of all, I'm very thankful you have the time to join us today. Secondly, I'm fascinated by how ideas develop, how people come up with creative thoughts that at the time don't seem like much, but how you kind of work your way or iterate to where you are today. So what I'd love to do is take me back as far as you can to where the spark or the first inkling of this idea came. And why don't we work through and describe as you're telling the story, describe as it exists today and where you see it goes. Please.
Well, Gary Cinderbrandt, it is a pleasure to be speaking with you here today, and thank you for making time for me. You know, a lot of us, if we reflect back on our history, have worked in retail. Working in a retail store as a part-time job is something that so many of us have done over the years, and that's where I got my start as well, as a college student, working in a retail store. And it was in one of these retail stores that I eventually became the marketing manager for, and we were a single location computer and software store. Now, Gary, you might recall, being of a vintage of a certain age, that
I'm older. I got it.
We used to buy software in retail stores. Remember those days? Mm-hmm.
It came on a floppy disk.
It sure did. Well, it was one such store that I worked in, and we were a really successful independent retail store in the age when you didn't have to be a chain. And as the marketing manager, I was responsible for placing advertisements in newspapers, radio, remotes, and do some local television, that kind of thing. And you know what? We would run these promotions, and as a single location store, I could see how people were being drawn into the store. It was attracting all kinds of traffic into the store. But at the end of the day, the owner of the store would count the money in the till and say, that was just okay. And that's what really irked me. And that's what really set the next 3 decades of my life in motion. Because I soon realized that marketing and advertising, that just creates opportunities for the retail store. And it's all about what happens once that visitor crosses the threshold, enters the store environment, and has a shopping experience. We were doing a great job of driving traffic into the store. Where we were stumbling is in converting that traffic into sales. And that was the genesis of everything I do today.
So that's surprising in and of itself. So I'm going to just pause right there, because to me, it's get him to the door or get him inside the door. And it would never even think of, oh, well, we're getting a lot more traffic, but nobody's reaching into their pocket. Interesting. Please continue.
Yes, indeed. The retail industry is largely driven by what shows up in the till, just like this store owner did to me. But the connection between store traffic and store sales is much more nuanced than people believe. And your characterization is spot on. Most retailers, even to this day, believe that it's just about driving traffic to the store, and if they come, they will buy. And it's just not. The data doesn't support that. And here's what I mean. Just like in the computer store I worked, we could drive a bunch of people into the store. But this was the early to mid 1990s. Computers were expensive. They cost $5,000 for a personal computer. Software cost hundreds of dollars. And so it was a very considered purchase. So even though we were able to drive traffic into the store, we had 20 associates on the sales floor. They were all engaging and busy serving customers. The other customers couldn't get served. They left without buying. And so, what I have seen over these last 2 decades of being focused as a store traffic and conversion analytics expert is that you can have more traffic and sales can go down. The store gets over busy, staff can't handle all the visits coming in, and sales can decrease even while store traffic is up. And conversely, and here's the good part, you can have a decline in store traffic, fewer people visiting because there's fewer people to serve, your conversion rates can go up because you can deliver better service, really luxuriate these customers with your time and attention, and that can be reflected in higher sales.
So take me back to when the store owner was like, meh, what's the big deal? And you're scratching your head going, there's an issue here. How did you start to develop? I guess first you had to develop a hypothesis to test a theory. How did you kind of work your way through to identify what those leverage points might ultimately become?
Well, yeah, yeah. And so that was the conundrum that I faced. It's why aren't we looking at store traffic? Why are we only looking at sales outcomes when marketing really should be measured by how much traffic or activity it draws? So I was going to finishing my commerce degree at university. And I was scouring marketing textbooks and retailing textbooks and trying to look for the answers. How should I do this? And none of these books actually spoke to that. And so, the internet was hardly what it is. It's not even close to what it is today. But in one of these library books, I found an old magazine called Chain Store Executive, and I found a little advertisement for a company saying they're selling an electronic people counter. I reached out to this company via fax. Remember those? And they said they'd be delighted to sell me a people counter for $2,500. Well, I was excited. I thought, well, good. This is going to help prove the case. Was our marketing effective? So on and so forth. So I gathered up all my research. I went to the store owner and I said, look, we're spending $250,000 a year on advertising,
Wow.
but we don't know what it's really doing for us. This traffic counting will help us really understand this such and such. And he stopped and he said, $2,500? We could do another radio remote or we could do more advertising. No, we're not going to invest in that gadget. That's what he said. And so this was my first experience in, penny wise, dollar foolish.
Yeah.
But I was so convinced that traffic counting was going to make a difference in helping us contextualize what was going on in the store and understand results that I went to a couple of the other students that happened to be working in the store. They hired a lot of university students, and these two guys actually were engineering students. And I said, hey, can you guys build me a people counter? Infrared beam, basic beam, connect it so I can dump all the data into Microsoft Excel and try to analyze it. And they said, sure. So with $300 in parts from Radio Shack that I paid for out of my own pocket, I found myself in the traffic business, and my
Wow.
company, HeadCount, was born.
Amazing.
So we started to collect traffic data. I asked for permission. The owner said, yeah, go ahead. We started to collect this data, and it just opened our eyes.
So
We
what did you
started to look-
find?
Yeah.
Y-
Well, fair question.
This is fascinating.
Well, the important insight was conversion rate.
Hmm.
How many visitors actually buy? And you can only understand conversion rates when you compare the transaction counts, that is the number of sales made, to the visits that came in the door in the first place. So without traffic, without that traffic count data, you have no means of comparing. So we were able to immediately see our busiest days, our busiest hours. We were able to see the impact of promotions and how that would lift traffic. We were able to calculate our conversion rates to the hour of the day. And we could see sags in conversion rates at day parts and go, hey, we need to realign our staff scheduling. Anyway, that's what started this whole world of this is really a big idea. And I thought, oh my gosh, headcount is going to be, retailers weren't really doing this. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be like a Google. This is, this is going to be something.
Uh-oh. So what happened with the software and computer store? What was the net impact when you went back to the owner? First of all, did you ever get your $300 back from the owner?
No, because I wanted to keep the intellectual property to
Okay.
myself. So I was
Good.
just I was concerned he wanted to get a piece of the action,
Sure.
which he did not, which was good for me. Um, but the reality was, and Gary, this is the funny part. I thought, oh, Eureka, I discovered something. So I thought, okay, so we started building, these things basically by hand, basic traffic counting devices and infrared sensors. And I started to knock on the doors of some of the local retailers in the city that I lived. And funny thing, I got the same answer as my owner gave me. Why would I want to collect this data? Why would I want what is this going to tell me that my transaction data or my POS data or sales data doesn't already tell me? And I've been evangelizing for trafficking conversion for the last 20 years as a result. But the truth of the matter is that business was a failure. I gave up on it. I tried. I sold a few units here and there, but I just thought, damn, retailers are never going to get this, and yeah, I'm tired of beating my head against the wall. So I gave it up. I just let that sideline just go into hibernation, if you will. I went on, finished my business degree, ended up at software company Intuit, QuickBooks, Quicken, and anyway, I was the vice president of the small business division for Canada after an 8-year career. And at that time, we were trying just before, and I left on a 1-year sabbatical. They gave me a 1-year sabbatical, which is pretty ridiculously interesting in this day and age. But at the time that I left Intuit on this sabbatical, we were trying to figure out how do you turn QuickBooks accounting software into a recurring service? Because the problem with a great product is when somebody buys it, they don't want to buy it again. And every business is trying to grow and generate new
Yeah.
revenue. Anyway, I thought this is a perfect model for store traffic and conversion analytics for brick and mortar retailers. And so I relaunched HeadCount as a recurring software, like
Fascinating.
analytics as a service business. And I was the first to do that in 2003.
So you readapted as a SaaS-based business?
Exactly right.
Amazing. So the technology caught up to you. So you had the hardware to measure, but you didn't have bandwidth, you didn't have storage, you had expensive computers. You go off and develop your technical side at Intuit over an 8-year period, while tech is kind of catching up to an idea that you had 2 decades ago. Mark, this is incredibly fascinating. So now all of a sudden, Intuit, which is not a SaaS business for the most part, although every time I do my tax return, it sure seems like that. So I'm not quite sure how that works. But so now you're going to put a store counter on a subscription basis and flow it right through their QuickBooks?
No integration with Intuit.
Okay,
The
bring
Intuit
me
reference
through.
is that recurring service models were in my mind,
I
and
see.
we were trying to
Okay,
solve that problem. And in
got
fact,
it.
Intuit did solve it. It's called payroll.
Yeah,
If you have payroll tables, you have to keep continually upgrading.
yeah.
And it was actually my boss in that ran Canada that came up with that idea. Okay, so I thought I had the model, and I thought that was the sticking point. That was what the barrier to retailers, because you sell them a traffic counter, and even the few that I did sell, I would call these retailers back in the day, and I'd say, "Hey, how are you using the data? And what value are you getting from this?" They go, "Oh yeah, we're not really looking at it anymore. It's nobody's really focused on it here." I realized that the problem was usage and consumption of these
Sure,
insights.
always.
Okay, so then, okay, analytics as a service. Okay, it's going to rain money, Gary. I'm telling you right now, it is going to rain money when I do this. You know what I get?
I get it.
Nothing.
Is it right?
Retailers saying, why should I do this? What is this going to tell me? Transactions don't tell me. And so I was back to square one, but with a different business model. And as I was wandering West Edmonton Mall, which at the time was, I think, the largest mall in the world, I'm wandering through the mall and I'm looking up at each one of these retailers and seeing how many aren't counting traffic. And I said, this opportunity is just too damn big. There's something not quite right here, but I can't seem to break into these retailers. Hold on. Nobody's written there's nobody said anything about traffic counting. Why they should. There's no books on this. I don't see it in marketing textbooks. I know. Why don't I write a book on this?
Okay.
Explain the value of these metrics, and then I'll use that book to build the business. Okay. So it took me a year to do it, evenings and weekends, while I still tried to knock on a couple of doors in 2004.
During your sabbatical.
Yeah, well, 3 months into my sabbatical, I called my boss back and I said, I don't feel right taking into its health benefits and stuff. I I'm dedicating myself to this new venture and I'm not coming back. So 3 months into my sabbatical, I cut that off. I guess which is a good entrepreneurial move. You
Yeah.
just, burn the bridges. You know what I mean? Keep going forward.
And eliminate any possibility they're going to put a claim on that since you were still technically working for them.
Well, yeah. Anyway, yes, that
Smart
was the
move.
other thing too.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be fair about things. Anyway, so I self-published the first book. The first 50 copies show up in my office, a box, two boxes of books. I start firing off copies of the book to CEOs of retail chains.
Okay.
And guess what? People take calls from authors. They just
Amazing.
do. And those calls led to meetings, the meetings led to business, and that's how HeadCount started.
Wow. That's amazing. You know, it's um I've had a couple of interactions with Michael DeLon. I don't know if you know that name or not. Michael does exactly what we just described. Michael writes books to promote people's businesses, and he has the exact same comment that if you have a book, you are immediately recognized as an authority. You can publish all the white papers you want. You can make as many LinkedIn posts as you want. But if someone can physically put something in their hands. Now, was this a conclusion before you wrote this book? Were were you convinced that this would solve it, or you were just going to keep poking at it until something fell your way?
Okay. I'm going to just disclose this only to Gary Cinderbrand.
All right,
It
everyone else
was an
stop listening.
act. It was an act of utter entrepreneurial desperation.
Mark, all entrepreneurs are desperate. I
Yes,
mean,
indeed.
that should be the first description in the dictionary. An inspired
Yeah,
idea in search of a sponsor. That's great.
indeed.
So the 50
I've
books, you sent them out
mhm, mhm.
and people read them.
They read them. They took meetings with me, and we were off and running, and
Tell
our
me about
business
the
started
first
to grow.
meeting. I have to hear the first time you were sitting there inside thinking to yourself, I can't believe this is because it had to be inside, you had to be jumping up and down that you finally
I
broke
was.
through. I want to hear about that.
I was, and I'll share the first story that was so memorable, and that he was the CEO of a large chain of furniture stores,
Okay.
and this was a bigger enterprise, and this was a very serious. I don't at the time I don't recall what the revenue was, but they were publicly traded, so it was a big company, and I get this one-on-one meeting with their CEO, and he's this 8 foot tall, not 8 foot, but 6 foot six, kind of a blustery CEO type. Anyway, so I get ushered into his office, sit down. There's a copy of my book sitting on his desk. I was very prideful. I carried one with me. It was my shield of steel. I'd hold it up whenever I was afraid. Anyway, he looks across the table at me and he says, Well, Mark, he goes tapping his finger on my book. You must know something. You wrote a book. So how do we do business? That's that was my first meeting.
Oh, that's amazing. So, did you have pricing models involved? Did you have an idea of how you're going to implement? Did you have a company? I mean, bring me to that because all of a sudden now you've got a whale. And
Yeah,
what are you going to
right.
do? How are you going to implement?
Oh, well, we learned as we went
I
because we
imagine.
we we really didn't know how to do it other than we knew the metrics, we knew what we needed to do. But I will tell you that certainly in the first 5 years, we were just trying to figure out what this data meant ourselves. And because retailers were unfamiliar with this data themselves, because it was still pretty new, like big data in the world of analytics, that was really 2010 and later. So this was really precursor to that. And so our my own team of analysts, we took it upon ourselves to try to interpret this data and what did this mean and why were conversion rates sagging and so on and so forth. And it was very laborious. Like this model didn't scale well, but we were building such rich knowledge and a depth of understanding of this data. 5 years later, I ended up writing a second book called Conversion, The Last Great Retail Metric. And it's almost like the first book was this is what I think this is about and why it's important. The second book was here's what I know is important and
Hmm.
what you need to look at. We started sending that book off to all kinds of CEOs and continue to grow the business. And yeah, and then I ended up just finishing a third book.
Wow. That's an amazing story. It's incredible. Sometimes you'll have an inspired idea, and despite the fact that you get knocked down 6 times, you get up that seventh time, and all of a sudden that door opens, and the person that's going to agree to do it doesn't know that essentially they're just one iteration behind you as far as what's going to happen next. Because you're thinking to yourself, okay, I've got this thing on the line. What do I do? How do I take it? I think about this also from my own background and looking at, the number of analyst reports, fundamental equity analysts have written on consumer durables in retail, from, Target to Best Buy and anything else that's there. And I'd be surprised if you don't have some good fundamental financial analysts following this trend as well. Are you aware of anyone in that world, any research analysts following this information?
It's funny you should mention that because this was very much in my mind during when I wrote the second book, Conversion Last Great Retail Metric, because I would listen to the earnings calls of major retailers as you're just describing, and the retailers would talk about their earnings, and many times they would talk about traffic. Traffic is up, traffic is down, mall traffic's down. That's why our results are poor, et cetera, et cetera. Yet I knew that for some of these retailers, they weren't actually counting store visits or store traffic. When they said traffic, what they meant was transactions.
Right.
Transactions as a proxy for traffic, which they are not. Okay. Imagine, what if Amazon, instead of tracking their website traffic, looked only at sales? How many transactions? How many servers would they build? Enough just for those transaction counts or for the total visitation that they
Sure.
get, which is significantly higher? In any event, it caused me to reach out to a Wall Street analyst that was on this call that I listened to. And I reached out to him, this stock analyst, and I said, I'm writing a book, or I've just written a book on store traffic and conversion. I noticed that this particular retailer you're tracking, so on and so forth. They were talking about traffic, but I know they don't track traffic. Why doesn't Wall Street ask about traffic in conversion versus accepting transactions as a proxy? Anyway, this gentleman took my call. We get on the phone and he says, well, Mark, we would look at traffic if they gave it, but most retailers either don't have it or don't report on it. And I said, but yet you accept that as Wall Street. You take these results at face value. Traffic's up or down when you don't even know what traffic is, whether it's up or down. Anyway, the point of it was he validated
Yeah.
my perspective on this, and it just gave me even more confidence to go after even the biggest retailers by sending them books.
So I imagine that your data is proprietary to that retailer.
Yeah, just imagine if it was the retailer's POS data. That's proprietary. We think of traffic and conversion data.
It's close.
It's vital data and should be treated accordingly.
And let me come back to one other point that I think I just want to make sure I understand it. Your comment earlier about there's not necessarily a direct correlation, there may be a negative correlation between staffing, traffic, and sales. And I assume that what your data is going to allow people to do is get much better cost control around giving people that much better experience when they come into the store. They can get served as opposed to wandering the aisles and you can't find anybody because you advertise a promotion for $1,000 TV, which is now, $90, and you're packed, but no one can get to anybody. So is that where the numbers hit the bottom line primarily? Is it a staffing and cost issue versus sales conversions and traffic?
You're hitting on one of the most important themes in the entire book, and that it's a theme in all three of my books, and that is the impact and the importance of frontline labor. So there's two parts to it. Number one, you rightly point out, Gary, and that is how do I optimize this labor expense, which beyond inventory is likely the next highest discretionary expense for a retailer with a physical store. So you want to make sure you optimize, not overstaff or understaff. But of course, you also want to make sure the other part of this is to make sure you're staffing optimally for when traffic's in the store so you can maximize sales. So great customer experience, aligning staff to traffic. It seems like it's as sort of obvious as motherhood and apple pie.
Sure.
So you tell me why the majority of retailers don't track traffic, because without traffic data, how do you even align? See, that's the thing.
So are you able, when you're calling on a new client, are you able to use any of your de-identified data to show what that bottom line is if they start doing those alignments as you discussed?
Yes, I do have some examples, but here's what I encourage every retailer to do. Their operation, and in fact, every store within their chain is unique. That's the truth.
Mm.
If I showed you a graph of a 1,000 store chain, I think I use an 800 store chain in the book. If you look at the traffic and conversion profiles of each one of these 800 stores, you will not find two that are the same.
Mm.
And conversion rates can vary dramatically, even within the same chain. And so, what I tell retailers is, I can show you the kind of leverage that others have gotten, but what's really important is how you get leverage in your operation. And we start by mapping traffic and conversion for all your stores and identifying super converters, because that's where the money is.
So you've got your own hardware that you install at this point, I would assume. You're still working with the same guys that built the Radio Shack version?
No, but you know what? They're still shareholders in the company. So I treat them as founders, and we go back over 30 years. It's terrific. They're long, dear friends of mine, but they're not active in the business anymore.
Mark, this is an absolutely fascinating story. And I just, when you start literally with just an idea and coming up as a financial advisor or quote unquote broker at 24 at Merrill Lynch, you basically are starting with nothing. You get a phone, and the only thing you have in your gut is fear. If there's sufficient grit, you might have a chance to make it, or stubbornness, or too dumb to quit, or anything like that. But that's where great ideas come from. You never know how close you are to get there. This is just a really interesting story. And I might take you up on it. Instead of If the Public Only Knew, I'm going to make this one If the Public Only Knew about retail. I never knew any of this stuff.
If retailers only knew.
I think we're going to retitle this episode for you. Mark, how do people find you? I'm sure we've got some people out there that either know someone that could benefit from your wisdom, or they may be someone that can benefit. How do they reach out to you? How do they find you? Where do they get the book?
Sure. The book called Store Traffic is a Gift. And it really speaks to how to, store traffic and conversion in the post-pandemic world. Because when COVID smashed into the retail industry like a meteorite and changed it forever, this book updates the concepts to account for these changes in the industry. You can reach me and hear more about our work at headcount.com. That's the best place to go. The book comes out September 30th, and it'll be available everywhere books are sold.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Mark, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. I love hearing these stories. I could talk to you for hours. It's just such a cool thing, and it's inspiring. And if anyone that's in the entrepreneurial world is, all of my fellow financial advisors, most of them that started, we came up with nothing but an idea and a determination not to quit. It's a little different now than it used to be, but your methodology of assessment and alignment, it just seems so like it naturally evolved in so many different ways. Well done, sir. A really, really impressive story.
Thank you, Gary. And it's been my pleasure and privilege to speak to the Gary Cinderbrand.
Oh, God. Folks, I've been enjoying this last half hour or so with Mark Ryski. Creative genius is all I can come up with, and a stubborn guy, which is what you need as well. If you believe in your own idea, you just keep it going. Thanks for tuning in. You'll see where to find Mark with the links below the podcast. Once again, this is Gary Cinderbrand. You've been listening to If the Public Only Knew. Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.